Dorothy, you are the head of policy and public engagement at Google DeepMind.
That's right.
You have been working for years in the tech sector, and you have also studied practical ethics,
Yes.
which is obviously super relevant for the conversation today. Now, we've heard a lot about AI today, and in the past couple of days, a lot about the opportunities and about also the risks that AI can pose for people, for society. At the end of the day, it all comes down to trust.
Yes,
Right.
it does.
And one way out of many to build that trust in the technology is to demystify the technology and to be fully transparent about when and how AI is being used, but also about the potential limitations of AI. Tell us more about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing to remember with any transformational technology is that transformative technology requires exceptional care from the people who are building and deploying it. And so when you think about from a technical perspective, the things that we have to build in to ensure greater trust, that's incredibly important, has to be a priority at the company. Last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, we launched a method called SynthID, which is intended to watermark generated images and also identify whether images themselves have been generated. And it's at the research stage at this point, and we've released it for testing. But we think that kind of work in the generative AI space is just as important as the work being done to build the capabilities themselves, because that kind of matching of technical checks and balances with the capabilities is what it's going to take for people to be able to trust and understand what they're dealing with. So that's on the technical front. I think on the socio-technical front is the way I'll call it, which is the social aspects of it. You need to build ways for people to your point, demystify the technology, understand and engage with it, and then also collectively decide what we want this technology to do in society. I think it's still really unclear what the most beneficial use cases of chatbots are. And certainly that's only one dimension of how AI will come into the world. What are the big global challenges that we want AI to be able to address? And how do we ensure that AI is put to use in those cases? And how do we collectively decide that as a society versus it simply being decided by the people who are developing and deploying it today? So that's something that at Google DeepMind we're really committed to. We've been doing a series of roundtables with people from the disability community, for example, which we released a report on this week, with educators and education policy experts. Earlier this week, we did one with folks in the food security sector who work on agriculture. And these are all vertical expertise areas that we actually, as a company that works on general technology, we don't hold that expertise. And so it's really important for us to work with academics, with civil society, with other industry partners to be able to understand and develop together where this technology should be put to greatest use.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Let me turn a second to governance.
Yes.
Today we see policymakers around the globe in a rush to regulate AI, right? Just last year, according to the World Economic Forum, 127 countries have passed AI-related laws. Job security for lawyers, for sure. And in Europe, the EU AI Act is expected to be adopted by the end of this year, right? And may actually set the global standard for AI. What is your take on these AI regulations? Do you think that they are really going to deliver the promise of maximizing the benefits of the technology while minimizing its risks?
Well, I think regulation is incredibly important. And historically, what we've seen is that good regulation actually creates public trust. So in an ideal situation, that's what happens, is that you enable the development of this technology in line with the public interest through good regulation. I think technology is extremely difficult to regulate for a number of reasons. I think it evolves very quickly. And so what you don't want is a static piece of regulation that is built based solely on the way the technology looks today. I think one of the things I'm most nervous about is that we basically get chatbot regulation. And then you basically ignore everything else that AI is able to do and the different manifestations that it will appear in. So, for example, the work that we've done on protein folding with AlphaFold as a system, which is really important in the space of biology, for example, looks and feels and operates completely differently from a chatbot. And so you have to take all that into consideration. So I think regulation both needs to be flexible and in that way, hopefully you get it to be future-proof versus something that is based on one snapshot in time. So that's important when you're thinking about horizontal regulation. But I also think in the vertical sectors, in the same way I was saying how companies building general models need to engage in the vertical sectors, we do need the different vertical sectors in government as well to be thinking about how they want to regulate. So for example, from a transportation perspective, from a health perspective, from a financial perspective, it's got to be both horizontal in terms of some standard setting that's flexible, and then on the vertical front, we have to leave it to those experts specifically to decide how AI should be used in each of these regulated sectors. I think that's the approach that we're seeing a lot of different governments start to take, and certainly one that we're supportive of and excited about.
Thank you. And what I would add is there's also an urgent need for global convergence, right? Because today, there's not even alignment about how AI is being defined, and even less so about what transparency, accountability, fairness really mean in practice. So, I mean, efforts like the ones driven by the UN, by the OECD, G7 are really, really important in that respect to build that global and harmonized approach to responsible AI.
Absolutely. I mean, I use the example of, if you think about having worked in ride sharing before, we're all in New York City, and New York City has a very specific set of licensing and ride sharing requirements. Now, the reality is a lot of people commute into New York from New Jersey, Connecticut, and then greater New York as well. And people are certified to drive in all these different places under different regulations, actually at the city and state levels. But they're interoperable to the point where you're able to have somebody drive from New Jersey or Connecticut into New York City and then back out. How do we think about that on a global perspective when it comes to AI regulation, right? We want the systems to be respectful of local cultural norms. There are certain things that I believe should probably be addressed and regulated at the national and local levels when I think about, for example, bias. I think bias there's some global bias related issues, but there are some that are very specific to the cultural context that you're in. And that's best done at the national levels. But we also need some overarching principles at the international levels to make that interoperable in terms of the regulatory systems and environments that we're putting together. And so if a system is built in the US and in France, they are built under interoperable regimes. That's I think what the ideal thing is to see. And conversations, for example, at the G7 with the Code of Conduct that they've recently released, all the way to summits like the forthcoming UK AI Safety Summit are places where these conversations are really crucial, as well as the OECD. Conversations are really crucial to build that interoperable type of standard.
Thank you. Now, industry has also a role to play here, right?
Of course.
And no one can do this alone. So how do you think actually industry can collaborate more to share learnings, best practices, knowledge, so that collectively we can really address all these challenges and make the most of AI?
This is one of the biggest challenges I think we see, which is that there's a concentration of knowledge and expertise right now on AI, especially on the most advanced systems, that exists primarily in the private sector. And that's actually fairly unique. Like a lot of the big breakthroughs you've seen happen before were federally funded by government, and there was a different constellation of how these things came together. So I think it's actually, we see a shifting role for the amount of moral labor that needs to be done between governments, industry, and civil society alike. And it's all shifting and changing. I think from our perspective, we at Google DeepMind are committed to responsible research practices as well as innovation. And what we do is basically have a cross-functional group that meets on a regular basis from all parts of the company, both from the technical perspective and from the socio-technical perspectives, to really weigh a lot of the decisions that we need to make from an ethical perspective. And then once we make them, we actually still monitor how they play out, and we bring them back to that group over time. And it's training that muscle of responsibility that is shared across the company and not particular to one compliance organization or one privacy group, but across the board. which is something that's, as you know, as an executive at a company, it's not easy to build that culture, but it's incredibly important. We also bring in a lot of external expertise to that group because we know that not all the expertise about the issues we need to tackle are housed within DeepMind. The best example we have actually is when we launched AlphaFold into the world, some of our partners were the Drugs for Neglected Disease Institute, for example. Why would we, for example, release protein structures just related to COVID before we were going to release them for neglected diseases? It's something that we had to really query as a company and think through how we wanted to do this in an equitable way. And so I think having bioethicists, ethics experts who are external to us to be able to consult on this front is incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. So I have plenty more questions to ask, but I have my analog reminder here. And so I think actually the only thing that I can say is that knowing that people like you are working to solve these issues makes me optimistic about our future. So thank you.
Thank you so much.